You're watching Sky News. The top stories this hour. The Prime Minister is preparing to meet EU leaders later this week as Downing Street talks down a leaked document outlining the risks of no deal. The government has ordered urgent action to tackle online anti-vaccination campaigns following a spike in measles cases. And the Iranian supertanker being held off the coast of Gibraltar on suspicion of breaching EU sanctions has now left port. It's heading through the Mediterranean towards Greece. Let's go back to our top story now, and Downing Street's attempt to downplay that leaked secret Whitehall dossier, warning of aftershocks in the event of a No Deal Brexit. I'm joined by Chief Lead Writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and the Director of the Westminster Policy Institute, Sean Worth. Good morning to you both. Thanks so much for joining us. A 3-month meltdown. It doesn't sound too good. Sonia, what do you think?
No, it doesn't sound good at all. And I think what's important to stress about this is it's a relatively recent document. So it really does reveal the sort of extent of government expectations about what might happen in the case of a no deal Brexit. And even though the government is, the government are trying to pass it off as something old, the date on it makes clear that it's very recent. And I think the other important thing about it is that this is not worst case scenario planning. This is stuff. So we're talking about things like food shortages, fuel shortages, a hard border going up in Ireland before not too long. These are things the document makes clear that the government expects to happen. It's quite likely to happen. It's not stuff that is some kind of, doomsday scenario. So I think it's quite extraordinary, first of all, that this is stuff that the government expects to happen, but also that it's not stuff that's been shared with people, with the business community. So today you saw the Freight Transport Association saying, no one's talked to us about fuel shortages. If this were to come to pass, it would have huge impact on moving vital goods like food around the country. But we didn't even know that this is something the government expects to happen. So how are we supposed to plan for it?
Sean, what do you think? Because actually, Michael Gove has said that it's old and that it is worst case scenario. He said the document that has appeared in the Sunday Times was an attempt in the past to work out what the very, very worst scenario would be so we could take steps to mitigate that.
Yeah, this is, regardless of whatever version of this document has emerged, I can guess quite confidently this would be a live document. And the fact that it's been presented to ministers suggests that it was something that was commissioned by ministers. But the point to make on this is that it's highly embarrassing to Number 10, of course, for a document like this to get out. But genuinely, when I was in government, I've seen documents of this kind with scenarios painted which are very, very extreme and highly unlikely to manifest. But the job of the civil service, which is the army of people behind government, the job of them is to make sure that there are plans in place should the worst happen. Right? They have to do that regardless of whether politicians ask for them or not. And I can tell you that I'm sure that there'll be documents of this nature that ministers haven't seen drawn by the civil service. But the point is that they have to do those plans. The reason you don't put them out to the public is exactly what you're seeing now, is that people are basically saying if there's been a plan discussed, worked on, written down in government, this must be a situation that government accepts could happen as a result of its policies. That's a highly damaging thing for Number 10 to have out there, and that's why they're so angry about this leak. But I would say very confidently that scenario painted in there, I've looked at it in detail, that scenario painted in there is not one that they expect to transpire, but they have to, it's a responsible thing to do, they have to prepare for it.
Right, Sonia, what do you think? Highly, highly embarrassing, isn't it? Because leaks aren't meant to be part of this government, are they? They're meant to be a thing of the past.
Yes, that's right. It is very embarrassing for exactly the reasons that Sean has just outlined. What I would say, I think, though, is, I think, having read the report, that this is not worst case doomsday scenario planning. It is stuff that very well could happen. And I think what's extraordinary about it is, this isn't some huge catastrophic event that's outside of Britain's control, like, perhaps us going to war or something like that, that we have to prepare for, but, is not in our control. This is, if a no deal Brexit happens, it will be as a result of government policy. It will be entirely self-inflicted. So it's quite extraordinary. I've never really seen a country kind of do this sort of scenario planning for things like food shortages, fuel shortages, for example, as a result of self-inflicted government policy. I think it's just crazy, really.
Sean, go ahead.
When I was in government, I saw all sorts of documents about, I remember one about the port of Calais being taken over by people striking and rioting and all sorts of, you get all sorts of scenario plans that you have to put in place. And the fact is, ministers will have commissioned this, that's absolutely right, but they will say, what are the scenarios? What is the worst possible scenario you could invent? Paint it and tell me the plan for how we would deal with that. As a responsible government, as a responsible civil service, you have to put those plans in place. I'm not trying to defend the government or their position on this, because as Sonia says, it's, this is not a terrorist incident or a war that they're planning for. This is a result of active policy. But remember, that policy is a result of a referendum on leaving the EU. The politicians can't work out how we get out of the EU, so of course you're going to have scenario planning on all kinds of different levels. It's fun, it's a great story for the media to kind of whip this up and say that these are plans that are actively under consideration, that this is actually going to happen. But, as I said, the kind of stuff I've seen myself in these documents in government, these scenarios are highly, highly unlikely. I do believe government when they do say that. The fact this come out in a leak is the interesting thing, and who did it. And I suspect it's disgruntled people that want to get their argument for opposing no deal out there, because they know that the economic argument isn't working, and they're trying to appeal to people's sensitivities over things like food and medicines being unable to come into the country. And that's there could be a public interest case for putting this stuff out there, so I doubt whoever leaked it is going to get into kind of criminal trouble if these documents were marked secret, as I think they were. But yeah, that's the situation number 10's in, highly embarrassing.
Well, let's talk about this coming week, obviously, because you've got the PM heading off to talk to the Europeans. He's going to speak to Macron and Merkel. Back home, you've got this document being leaked. that's surely going to frustrate the negotiations, whatever form they may take. And that's exactly what Downing Street is saying, isn't it? That it's Remainers who leaked it because they just want to frustrate Brexit.
Well, I don't think it's a leak of this document that's going to frustrate the negotiations with Europe. I think the government policy is actually going a very long way towards doing that already. And I think Boris Johnson was very clear when he became Prime Minister that the only way he would strike a deal with the EU would be if they drop the Irish backstop altogether, a policy that's really important to the EU as an insurance to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. So, sure, these leaks will set some mood music, I suppose, for the talks this week, but I think the fundamentals for these talks, these negotiations, have already been set. They're going to be very difficult, and that's as a result of the UK government's position, which I think, lots of other people think, considering how much time and energy has gone into the negotiations with Europe, considering that the EU itself sees the backstop as a big compromise that it offered the UK. So they're saying, Boris Johnson coming in and saying, well, the only way I'm going to strike a deal with the EU is if they take this compromise that they've already made off the table. It leads you into some quite tricky territory. And I think that's why a lot of people feel like the government is, this isn't contingency planning, the stuff that was leaked, the Yellow Hammer documents. This is actually what the government may well expect to be happening, because it feels like we've got a government that's taking us into a no-deal scenario out of choice.
Okay, well, Sonia and Sean, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks so much for talking to us this morning.